Just a word of warning, my mic was basically acting up for the first 15 minutes of this video, and then I managed to fix it, so yay! It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's pretty annoying. I thought I'd let you guys, I'm well aware, don't worry, you don't have to comment about it, and it won't be like that in any of the other videos. Cheers, enjoy. Welcome to the most procrastinated video of the year for me. Today, we're talking about the current events. So guys, this should be pretty cool. There have been a lot of updates going into Guild Wars 2. I have missed an awful lot of them. And I guess, really, even though I'm going to be talking about a lot of cool stuff here and interesting ties and things with the lore, I think a lot of you guys might have missed. Some of the stuff I'm saying here might be fairly old to really regular players. Some of this is, you know, even a couple of months ago that it went in there now. So really, if you're a very active player, keep that in mind. But today, I want to sum up all the current event stuff that has gone in with Guild Wars 2. Well, why? I don't know. Maybe consider this a video for posterity and for people who haven't been following the game so much. Living World Season 1, for example, was a really interesting time with loads of cool little updates and interesting facts to it that now feels like sort of distant history, and I wish I'd covered it better. A lot of people ask me, hey WP, do you have a really good playlist of all the stuff that was going on in Season 1? And I just don't have a good answer for that. Some people in the community have tried to make one out of my videos and other content creators, but that kind of sucks. So for Season 3, with all these little current events and actually good content they're putting in there, I think it deserves to be talked about, because ArenaNet are doing an interesting thing. If you guys don't know what the current events are, they're the minor stories, they're the achievements, the events, and the updates that the devs started basically sneaking into patches with only vague descriptions about what exactly had happened to signify anything had gone in the game. And actually, some players are going to really enjoy this, and they're going to like the hunt and the discussion and what comes out of them going in like that. And other players are straight up going to miss it. So this has been going on from early 2016, really, since the cancellation of the legendaries, or the suspension of the legendaries, as I should say now. And every time they've done it, it's been complementing the main story that happens in the big Living World releases, all right? This is ArenaNet's method of infusing some of that large-scale Living World Season 1 style stuff that filters through into the game and makes it feel like stuff's constantly changing and alive. They're filtering that into what are the more instance-heavy and dialogue-based main patches with the Season 3 stuff. So they're getting, basically, the best of the both worlds. So as of this video, every single piece of current events, while the video's just gone up, is still active. Unlike Season 1, where a lot of it was temporary, the devs do seem very hesitant to take current event stuff out of the game. It's not exactly repeatable content, so it's still pretty forgettable because it's associated with achievements, which are obviously account-bound, but this is essentially a really large achievement category with tons of different tasks and rewards that only become available as you uncover the new events they add, find new NPCs, items, dialogue, stuff like that. So the way that this works, unlike with Season 1, is ArenaNet now have the possibility of hiding achievements in the UI. So there's an achievement you can get. In fact, this was here at launch. They did a couple of hidden ones around Ebonhawk, for example, but they're using that a lot in current events. So there will be achievements there. There will be tasks, things for you to do in current events, but unless you like stumble onto it or look on a forum or a video like this, you won't know it's there and you won't know that you're missing out, kind of thing. So I've already actually covered the first 3 or 4 patches worth of current events. I was doing pretty well for a while. There is a link to the previous video on screen now if you want to get that really early dip into this playlist, where we'll talk about increased bandit activities that started happening, the addition of a few new bosses around Crichton regions, as well as the fact that there was lots of ley-line magic spiraling out of control, spilling into various maps around the world, and the Consortium and the Priory began fighting for control over it. That's about where I left you guys off. And let's cover some more stuff. I want to preface as well something really major, okay? And a big theme of this video, something that I'm really going to try to express to you guys. The current events, the actual events, the dynamic events that they've added with these patches, in my opinion, are the most truly dynamic aspects and dynamic content we've ever had in Guild Wars 2, full stop. And I know that word dynamic feels very buzzwordy, but hopefully I'll explain what I mean there. What we're getting with these current events, to me, is probably what I think all those people back in 2012 were expecting when they heard that Guild Wars 2 was going to have a super dynamic world, except they were just expecting thousands of these style events all over the world. You'll see what I mean. I'm actually really impressed, and they immediately get the perks straight away of being these very natural, weird little inclusions into the game world. So if someone new started playing the game recently, or someone came back after a couple of years, and they made a new character and they're wandering around in Queensdale or something, they will find these things just filtered in there, and that already is a nice perk, but you'll see more about their implementation as we go. Alright, so in no particular order, I'll try to go chronologically as best I can, but it's a bit hard to keep all my ducks in a row here. Let's talk about some of the updates. So, I did already explain to you guys that new bandit boss started appearing in Queensdale, in the Crichton areas. Well, they doubled that a couple of patches later. That means we went from 5 of these bosses to 10. These were the guys you could get bounties from. There was like that little question. You could random bandits, you'd get a mark, you could take it to a guy, the guy would take you to the bounty, you'd get money for it. It's a repeatable achievement where you could keep getting AP. We talked about all that stuff, but they added a bunch more of those bosses. They've all been dropped around into Crichton maps that are north of LA, so not Bloodtide Coast, basically. And they're in like weird little areas of the map. Usually there wasn't content before, so you get to go to these rare, untrodden places, and there was an achievement to do all of that. But then there was a cool little patch in addition to that, and immediately you're going to start seeing why some of these events were handled a bit differently. There are new legendary bosses that they added. Now, these legendary ones have a chance to spawn after you kill the regular ones. So what happened with this patch was super interesting. They made it so that people who had already been participating in current events would log in on that day and they'd get a mail from some random person who presumably was from the White Mantle, and they would say, look, we've got our eye on you, you're marked for death. And you'd get this little item in your inventory saying you were marked for death. And if, while holding this item, you started killing bosses around the Crichton region, you had a chance of spawning a whole new event. And I really do just mean a chance. Now, I don't have a knee-jerk reaction to that idea of RNG just there, because it's really not as bad as it sounds. What would happen is if this procs, and it's more likely to proc, as far as I remember, the more players in the area who were marked for death, the higher chance it would be of spawning this boss. When this super rare boss would spawn, it would be way harder than any of the other ones. It was a legendary boss with really special particular abilities that special action hotkeys would tie into, and the fight itself would be genuinely really quite engaging. You're in a low-scaled map, so you're a low level or whatever, but it is hard. It is the kind of thing that someone who is just on their first time through would never be able to solo. These guys are tough. And specifically what's really interesting that I enjoyed about these fights, and is a technology and an idea I want to see them do more of in future Living World maps, in expansion maps and stuff, is these bosses would actually spawn something of an arena you'd have to fight them in. So they would use an ability when they spawn that creates this big magical dome, and it's a huge area around them, but is basically purely within their aggro radius, and it locks players into the battle with that boss. So one of the main things about open world is if there's a really deadly boss, like the Shadow Behemoth, if you're super low level and it's majorly overscaled and you consider him a huge threat, you're in the open world. You could just wander off till you break combat and then waypoint away, and there's never any real threat. There's no forcing you to get into that fight or really giving some of these enemies an opportunity to kill you, because mobility is so comfortable in Guild Wars, so you can just always run away. Well, the devs kind of tried to address that with this. It creates an arena, you're locked in, you are fighting this boss, and it's a fight to the death. Now, if the boss itself kills you and wipes you and everyone around him, and he's no longer in combat, he will despawn and go away. So it's not even something you can necessarily res rush as easily as a lot of the other events. Now, you still can res rush this stuff. If you got lucky enough to spawn one of these bosses right near a waypoint, you could keep charging while other people are dying, and you could maybe eventually whittle them down. But that idea of them forming this arena, locking you into the fight, and if they win, then they'll disappear, I've really enjoyed about these events. It made these bosses a lot more threatening. It's not the whole solution. They haven't found a way to stop you blinking in and out of the arena, for example. So some classes can still very comfortably get in and out. Sometimes the boss would actually leave the dome that it spawns in a weird way and get dragged out, and then that was some odd stuff too. I'd like to see the devs play with that idea more though, because if you guys remember, say in Drytop, they have those vine walls that they had the technology to close and stop portals working through them and stop blinks and things working through them. Couldn't they just assign that same idea onto these domes and just dynamically on the fly disable blinks and portals and things? That would be awesome. Did they just not have the capability for that, or did they forget the tech? I don't know. I'm wondering what you guys think about some of those bosses though, because I really enjoyed that. That was one of the first places I think that we saw the dynamic events get a bit more dynamic. Sure, the original bosses that then spawned these legendary ones were pretty cut and paste, right? They were on rails. They're just these simple respawn timers. But these new ones, there's a chance. There's a bit of RNG there. There's some ways that you can manipulate it by having this item with you. But that little bit of risk and that play there I think makes it feel a lot more living and a lot more interesting. Of course, it's going to get very frustrating if you desperately want to kill one of these things and you can't find one, but I never really had that problem myself. Moving on, I'll justify more of why these events get good very shortly. Another thing that came around the time of this patch, and sort of to wrap up the Crichton stuff, was an achievement, I believe, called Informed Politics. This is the kind of thing we saw way back in the War in Crichton in Guild Wars 1. What happened was, all around Kryta, the settlements around Kryta. So I'm talking about Seraph's Landing, I'm talking about Shaymore, Claypool, Fort Salma, Triskelion Vale, Garenhof, and so on. All these places, the little towns. Randomly, you would now start finding posters on the wall, and it was propaganda. It was propaganda at the time. You wouldn't really know who it was. There were hints it was maybe the White Mantle, and that was confirmed when Raid Wing 3 came out, of course, and then Bloodstone Fen a little bit later after that. But it was people trying to rally and galvanize those of Kryta against the throne, against the Seraph and the Ministry, and they're like tugging at the heartstrings of the peoples of Kryta and the problems that the Crichtons face. So your average Crichton, what are they disappointed about? Well, the fact that they've got all these bloody centaurs on their doorstep, no? And so all of these posters are saying, oh, what is it? What are the Queen playing out, having all of these centaurs around? They're really well written. My favorite location for any of these, by the way, there are about 20 and an achievement to pull them all down. My favorite was at a house where if you play the personal story as a human who never knew your parents, you'll actually learn that your parents were members of the Shining Blade who fought the White Mantle, and they lived at this house. You had a Shining Blade mother and father, their graves are there, and now in this current event you could find one of these posters on the house where your parents were. I think that was fantastic and a really nice little touch. I wonder whether a developer did that on purpose, or they were just like, oh, here's a nice house, I'll put one. In any case, some of my favorite messages here, like I said, there's 20. I'm not going to have time to read all of them. But my favorite ones here, just to give you guys some examples of what this propaganda says. One says, my ancestors died to stop the Char hundreds of years ago. How can we stomach them walking in the streets of Divinity's Reach? There's like a lot of xenophobic stuff here. They hate the Char, they hate the Centaurs. Another one says, the Crown's watchwork soldiers barely lasted a week before they were stolen. Surely this is a sign of foul play at work close to the throne. That being a reference to an old Season 1 patch that I really like them shedding more light onto. Someone else says, I wasn't accepted in the Shining Blades ranks, but they'll take on a criminal Sylvari. Just what are they thinking? That propaganda there is referencing Kanak, of course, being a member of the Shining Blade, or in association with them, I guess, at the moment. Someone else says, Keswick's Hills is all but barren after the invasion by the Snake Men and Sylvari. The Crown must repair our holdings in the area. So this is a reference again to Season 1. With the Tower of Nightmares, which was a huge, awesome patch. And again, anytime they reference back to this stuff, it makes it feel like a real event, right? I also love that they call it Snake Men instead of Crate, like these guys don't even understand what they were up against. Moving on, just two more here that I really, really enjoyed. One says, get Mesmers out of our government. How can we trust mind shapers to argue fairly for the people? And what a good point that is. Again, more distrust towards the Queen. This is the kind of stuff I love to see. And finally, another one on the Char, because, hey, I love the conflict between the Char and the humans. This guy says the Char can't be trusted. He says that once the dragons are defeated, their greedy eyes will turn to our lands just like years ago. And do you know what? That is something that I've always stood by too. The idea of all the races coming together in Guild Wars 2 is we have united to face the dragons. And what were the Char doing throughout the entirety of when we've ever known them, when there's not been dragons and a need to team up? Well, they've been conquering. And I love the thought that the Char would do exactly that. So I'm actually on board with that guy. All right, so yeah, that was an excellent little part of the patch. I want to see more of that kind of stuff. Current Events hasn't really done anything so lore heavy like that for a while. But hey. Also around this time, there was another little update. I already talked to you guys about the Priory and the Consortium fighting over Ley-line magic. I believe in Blaze Ridge Steppes was what I talked about. Well, those events did then expand to include Mount Maelstrom and Snowden Drift, which were the two maps that we'd seen Ley-line stuff had been going on previously anyway. And so you had associated achievements there. Do you help the Consortium? Do you help the Priory? And that idea of helping the Consortium or the Priory really became a big thing in the most recent current event, which I'll be talking about in a dedicated video after this, because we're just not going to have time for such an epic quest that is. All right, so what happened next after some of this Crichton stuff? Well, we had Living World Season 3 kicked off in full, and we had Bloodstone Fen, and we had an episode where, spoilers, we saw the destruction of the Bloodstone in the Maguma jungle. And with this came some Living World current event stuff, where it triggered a load of Bloodstone crazed monsters around Tyria, and the shards actually got flown all over the world. So there were two big main achievements here. One of them was very much like a lot of the other achievements we've been having, a bit like the propaganda post does. It was a worldwide hunt to find all of these Bloodstone slivers. And again, guys, I remind you, all this stuff is still in game. To find all of these Bloodstone slivers all over the place. So, like, that would take you back to the SS Topsy-Turvy and the Silver Wastes. It would take you to Ratasum. It would take you to Verdant Brink. It would take you to all over the place to get these Bloodstone slivers. There weren't too many, so it's not a particularly arduous task to get all of them. But I kind of like that achievement because it reminds me of that original story that the devs have always told of how the gods threw the Bloodstone in the caldera of the largest volcano on the Fire Island chain, and it erupted and spread the Bloodstone fragments all over the world. Well, that's kind of what happened here. We saw a Bloodstone explode and we saw fragments go all over the world. When you really think about it, that's kind of a bizarre story, right? Like a volcanic eruption can send these all over the world. I don't think Guild Wars is really high enough fantasy to handle that too well. So I wouldn't be surprised if in future Living World patches, they give us more explanation about that story and it turns out it's just a legend. And actually various peoples took the Bloodstone shards from the Fire Island chain and moved them around or something. But we'll see. So that was one part. The far more interesting part was the Bloodstone crazed creatures. So one component of this this current event was you had these new events going into the game. You just had to complete them, and the events involved killing a couple of legendary mobs. All right, so there was like a moa, there's a shark, there was a devourer, an arctidus, and so on there, and a wyvern. I think those were the ones. Bloodstone crazed versions of these characters. Now these mobs were legendary bosses that were very difficult. Big group events had new abilities associated with them. Again, special action hotkeys and so forth. But where they're really interesting is how they spawn. So in the jungle, you find a device called Levy's device. And this allows you to hunt down those Bloodstone crazed creatures. Now, before I talk about the events themselves, the fact this is Levy's device is already really interesting. Who's Levy, you might be wondering? Levy was a consortium employee who first worked with Ellen Keel way back in 2012 and 2013 in the earliest Living World stuff that the devs ever did. In fact, Levy was in patches before Living World was even an idea, okay? Levy was has the honor of being one of the first update NPCs we really interacted with. So she's an Asura that worked with the consortium, and she describes herself when you first meet her as studying biotherics. And she says, biotherics is a field of study I'm currently pushing to its limits. She says that her field of study measures the energy generated by a living creature, and that they were seeing some big waves. And that's quite cool, isn't it? Considering that in this patch, many years later, we've got all these creatures running around that are generating and being weird with energy. They are Bloodstone crazed. So Levy teams up with Ellen Keel to investigate the Karka attacks and finds out how Kanak had sabotaged the operation. And it gets a bit more interesting when you think about that. Well, what did happen on South Sun Cove? Well, Kanak kind of did something with plants and he made everything crazed, remember? And Levy sort of helped us there, and it's Levy's device we're finding with these crazed creatures now. Is that some suggestion that there's a relationship between the Bloodstone creatures and the craze that we saw on South Sun way back when? That would be a really good tie to make the South Sun stuff seem like a more relevant story, but I don't really have time to get into that whole topic right here today. It's just very interesting. Levy herself doesn't appear in the patch, by the way, as far as I understand. You can still go speak to her, but I'm not sure she references anything. You just find a dead male member of the consortium who had Levy's device on him, and you take it. So anyway, how does this device work? Why is this so cool? Well, you would double click it and you'd see some new tech immediately. What it would do is it would spawn around your character little minis, basically miniature versions of a variety of creatures, the shark, the moa, the so on. And what this is doing is showing you whether some of these Bloodstone creatures can actually spawn and will be available to kill. And it works on like half-an-hour cycles or something. But once one of them dies, that's it, it's dead, like globally dead. I'm not sure whether it's just on your server, because we're on mega servers now, right? I'm pretty sure it's just like different for EU and NA, but that's it. So once one of them dies, that's it. They're dead, and then you have to kind of wait half an hour for the next cycle or whatever. And again, if you were to go in and do these events now, it's not like it's that hard to miss these things, and there's plenty to go for. I managed to complete all of this in about 2 hours or so. So you use this device to figure out which ones can spawn, but then what do you do? Well, it turns out each of these mobs has a certain number of maps that they can appear on, and to get them to appear on that map, you kind of have to kill the regular equivalents of those enemies on that map. So, for example, I believe the Devourer could spawn on Drytop. So what you have is people on Drytop killing loads of regular Devourers, trying to get the new legendary one to spawn. This is as far as I remember, and I've got a pretty high chance of being wrong here, so do check the comments, guys, if I've made a mistake. But, so you would keep killing them. It reminds me a lot, actually, of Final Fantasy X2, the oversouling system, where if you kill enough of the regular type, a super badass, dangerous one spawns. And that I really enjoyed about this. But so that's kind of the way that the patch works, and you'll see now how these events with these legendary mobs are totally on the fly generated and dynamic, right? They can really appear kind of anywhere in the middle of any meta event that's going on nearby, and that makes it feel really quite unique when they finally do appear. Somebody posted just the other day of one of these crazed Bloodstone monsters, and again, these are deadly things that spawned at the same place as one of the executioners, one of the legendary bandits that I already talked about earlier in this video. Like, they crossed paths, and they can cross paths with any of the other events too. At the release of Guild Wars 2, the devs were really scared of having too many events localized to a single area. Everything was spread out and paced nicely, and all the story was in the specific areas, and there wasn't much dynamic. Nothing was really being generated out of that. It was a lot of stuff on rails. These kind of events really aren't doing that. So, as far as I understand, they don't have super fixed locations like that, just general regions they can appear. And when they do, you've got a big fight to go for. So, that was pretty excellent. You got an achievement, you got a new headpiece for killing all of this stuff. People quite like the skin, and that was that patch. So, next I want to actually talk about another very cool one that was very Living World Season 1-y. These were the Ley-line anomalies. Now, in my recent videos, you should have actually seen me participating with this quite a bit. Hopefully, I've got some good footage of it in the background. And this has actually been broadcast out to people in-game quite a lot. So, once every 3 hours, the Ley-line magic has built to ridiculous levels. We know that there's anomalies appearing everywhere. Well, there are some giant ones that spawn in the game now. If you guys remember Season 1 of Living World, they would have these big events that would take place on large maps and have hundreds of players tackling them. Some of the Scarlet stuff, for example. Some of the Attack on Lion's Arch stuff. Some of the Tower of Nightmares stuff. Well, these Ley-line anomalies are a bit like that. You will have like hundreds of people trying to complete this event. What happens is an anomaly spawns on one of 3 maps, Timberline Falls, Iron Marches, and Gendaran Fields, I believe, are the 3 maps. And this anomaly will spawn, and it's charging through the map, running incredibly fast. It's basically got super speed on it, even while it's in combat. That's the idea. It's like very, very, very quick, really hard to keep up with it. And it has a break bar, an immense break bar. And it's actually an interesting boss fight because it's a game of CC. What you have to do is chase after it, keep close as possible as you possibly can in this large Zerg, and hammer it with your immobilizers, with your chills, with any CC and Condi you can, with your stuns, with your pulls, whatever, to try and break that break bar. What the anomaly is trying to do is charge to another event that has also spawned on the map where there's Ley-line magic, and the anomaly is trying to collect the magic. So you have a large Zerg of people chasing the anomaly, and you have a smaller group of people, ideally, trying to kill the other event before the anomaly can get to it. So you're trying to slow this thing down. When you break its break bar, it will get stunned, it will be slowed down, buying the other team enough time to, you know, get rid of that magic. So that already is excellent design. I'm really enjoying that. But where things get very cool is when you finally break the break bar, it actually changes the event altogether. It phases into a different one that can happen anywhere on the map that this anomaly's been running. So the anomaly will stand still, and then it will start firing magic all over the place, and tons of other Ley-line creatures will spawn and try to run back into it, and you've got to try and kill those before he gathers too many. Once you've done that, you can finally do some damage to the dude, do about 25% of his health, and he's off to run again. And that's the way that that event works. But this is so interesting to me because some of these anomalies, right, they'll run around on mountainsides in ridiculous areas. They will stand right in the middle of any meta or other event that's going on in the map, and you'll see them right there, and you've got all these events overlaid on top of one another as you desperately try to stop this anomaly. There is nothing predefined about where these phases hit and transition. It's all based on when the players manage to break those break bars. And it is so fun. You can kill these anomalies. There's an achievement to do it 10 times. And pretty much every single time you try to grab one of these, you're going to have a different experience because people break that break bar at different places. There's cool moments in it as well where the anomaly will fly over lakes and things, and it will create these small jump pads on the fly that you end up zooming into the sky through through, and you've got to try and glide to keep up with the guy. It's a real game of CCs. You play different builds while you're there, of lots of mobility. And then finally, obviously, getting that little bit of damage in there. I love the anomaly events. I just wish they spawn maybe a little bit more frequently. But if they spawn too frequently, you're not going to get the really big zergs. And maybe they'll end up falling flat. I've actually been to a lot of these things where they fail. The rewards were pretty good on that too. You get mystic coins. People have been complaining about mystic coins being too expensive all the time. They're actually reasonable. Well, they're better to farm now than they have been in the past because you can do these anomaly events. And there are mystic coins coming out with them. There's another hidden achievement here, because most of these are hidden, where you can do it really well and you can stop him gathering any energy before he dies. Feels a lot like season 1. It's awesome. Okay, so that's a lot of the major stuff. The last thing that I really want to talk about in today's video, and you guys are caught up with a lot of the current event stuff, there's a lot, right? Is what happened just before the most recent patch, Rising Flames, the big patch. So this was sensor tracking. So there was a chart NPC called Size, and she started out in Frostgorge Sound. And what she did in Frostgorge Sound was she said she was trying to track something that she thought was basically moving around. And there was lots of magic everywhere. And they did kind of a really interesting little special action hotkey based quest thing you could do, where you speak to her and you get access to a special action hotkey, which when you pulse would create these little icons around your character of varying colors. And these would tell you how hot or cold and the direction you needed to go to find these tiny little orange shards around on the map. You had a time limit of about half an hour to explore all of Frostgorge Sound using this new special action hotkey to play this fun little mini game, basically collecting these objects. And every now and then Size herself would move in real world time. She'd move from Frostgorge, then slowly down through Gendaron, slowly beyond into Bloodtide Coast, and she was basically making a beeline tracking this creature that was underground from the central transfer chamber to the Fire Island chain. She remains to this day in Malcor's Leap, and all the previous locations that she went to, even though she's not there anymore, the devs actually left these little elemental sprites you can talk to, which will enable you to complete these achievements and do everything, even if you might have missed it the initial time around. You really don't miss out on very much dialogue, but this was our little hint and a big suggestion. We were about to go to the Fire Island chain, that Prime Ordis was moving there, and all of that good stuff right before Rising Flames came out, and we genuinely did go to the Fire Island chain. So again, you're actually seeing, I think, with the current events, not just a reasonable amount of content going in, stuff that reminds me of Living World Season 1, stuff that is getting filtered in an interesting way through the game. But I think the way that they're handling some of this content is very unique to Guild Wars 2. Stuff like Levy's device, stuff like spawning some of those Bloodstone creatures, stuff like the hot and cold game with the size tracking. All of these aren't things that we really saw much of, even in like Personal Story or the Heart of Thorns story, where, you know, they were really deliberate, small guided experiences with cool quirks and things like that. So I think the current events are worth playing, guys. If you care at all about AP, it's also really worth doing them. But it's also nice, I think, because it's one of those things that makes you see just how populated Guild Wars 2 still is when one of these little patches comes out. There's always hordes of people all over the place having fun and trying it out, and that's really a huge part of playing an MMO, isn't it? So there you go, guys. That's as best as I can do in a quick little sum up of all the current events video that each really deserved its own video, all in one. I will see you next time for the latest and the greatest, in my opinion, where we get a real little quest to go back to Ogden Stonehealer, learn about the Shadow Stone, and even a few more little bits and bobs around there too. So thanks, guys. Now you're caught up on current events. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what I got wrong, because there will have been some things on this video down in the comments, and I'll see you shortly. Have a good evening, guys. This year's gone. Starting Patcher, and if you guys weren't around back then, it was absolutely insane. It was a move that completely